forced to initiate nuclear war during the Cold War. There were 4 incidents to on each side for nuclear near misses took place after the Cold War. One way we could approve would be for the U.S. to formally declare will not use nukes first. NATO reserved the right to use first. U.S. officials expanded calculated ambiguity. Germany and Japan not denied this. The safe legislation actions with the adoption and a few others understand using nuclear to deter biochem or cyber threats unnecessary. No country expects the U.S. to use nukes except in response to nuclear united ambiguities. The U.S. out of 3 would bring order and clarity to strengthen peace. Tactical weapons could destroy the world by time safe for any use. Carries the inescapable risk of escalator chain beginning with the U.S. would reduce miscalculation allies and adversary chances of first strike would be non-existent. Protections on the FU can be adopted at first use. Postures prevent a global move throughout nuclear use, particularly for Ukraine with Russia. Helping in 22 Ukraine marked the first time since Cuba the world faced the prospect of nuke would be done. The United States must never use first time possible to get applied to third and use first or second and break the assumption of second use for the nuclear response to the nation. Putin responded to denying Russia was preparing use of that was necessary to deter first strike from the downplay to U.S. attacking into Russian nuclear. Russia giving serious consideration to a future trying to bring impose use of Ukraine and India. But Russian nuclear should not be used to building consensus to reduce like 3 days able to use Ukraine renouncing any threat. Nuclear might be used before war and say understand Takash off there will be nuclear deterrence makes a Russian fait accompli an existential threat. Taylor in 22 concerns over nuclear escalation growing Russian officials believe the U.S. is working to undermine stability reducing barriers. Diverse use the U.S. made a call for the real dukes of policies most ways deterrence increase like the rate of escalation Russia's minor station render escalate obsolete the 200 yield nukes in Europe believe the U.S. without a credible proportion response to Russian nukes Russian zip code reach any Baltic capital in less than 60 hours. Russia could attempt to fait accompli precipitating strike based on A5 and it would be forced to respond with nukes or lose Russia's defensive nuclear power. The main nuclear use will occur in response to U.S. nuclear ambiguity that's for body and prevent Russia's modernizing nukes to use the way nukes to survive attacks of the different nukes against the U.S. Russian reduce mere strategies but nukes reduce for uses defensive force back to circumstances. The purpose of escalation management is to ensure aggression. The military is not the move the use of uncontrolled escalation on 3 escalate raise answers wicked problems with great power conflict Russian and NATO make plans to use nuke and dual use arsenals to prevent the other from dominating any strike triggers a full-scale nuclear war and if used to prevent short-term escalation. Goldstein 18 Russia has interest in retaking control of the rivers here abroad. NATO will be obligated to defend one side might launch an attack to evict the other. Would NATO initiate tactical nuke siege would attack nearby bases. There would be pressure by the sides to launch a decapitating strike under current nuclear policies such would have a high probability ending in Armageddon. States need declaratory policies stabilizing these states ban prospect seems long-term and if you the absence raises risk of nuclear conflict increases motivation to develop nuclear. That's true even if the U.S. response can eventually go and rubber in 22 Russia the U.S. possess yet and then to be Russia that the limited exchanges separate from nuclear Armageddon and transitions can be controlled as unproven transitions are increased in probability accelerated by such weapons seen and produced by Russia broken them in exchange the Iran NSCs will aid any use will be met with cash off consequences by it. Said we face Armageddon NSC except escalation control is mythical that countries could respond through conventional to avoid escalations equally dangerous. Conventional response would be so devastating would provide further nuclear use. Second use would be aimed at NATO rather than Ukraine. Clear water needs to be reduced help conventional and nuclear attack. Contention to is solvency of the plan. The United States should adopt a nuclear no first use policy. Declaratory and a few drives verifiable changes in nuclear posture planning and training. U.S. NFU would become self-enforcing. Video and 16 NFU rules out a policy now in line with the reality second check strategy and forces after enunciation by the leadership. NFU provides intellectual background for classified guidance given to the leaders of the bring more weapons all the dirt and procurement. The NFU leads to practical visible shaping of action posture planning training and procurement that renders them unsuitable for missions other than deter and try to maintain with the plan first use under any circumstances. Views were inherited by successful leaders effectively constrained planning structure of Chinese forces inconsistent. The country lacks early warning. China has beyond lacks and self-control that with the U.S. anti-sub capabilities irrespective of speculation on future changes in Chinese policy discussions give way. And if the U.S. reducing risk of use and then if you decouple the nukes from day-to-day cognitive security mutual, then if you become self-enforced and if you produce cooperative dynamics and if you changes policies such as Babylon, if you defection, provoke defection, effective changes to enable the preemption or war fighting with the NATO cell that would require early warning system and if you eliminates the underlying motive for preemption that prevents miscalculation from both sides. Keep it in 22 and if you just reduce probability of a miscalculated nuclear strike from Russia and the security feeds of miscalculation if an adversary with the U.S. may use nuclear weapons first like the strike preemptively Russia could use U.S. with mistrust even slightest conflicting signal enough to justify the preemptive miscalculation become increasingly likely Russia highly perceptive of the minor station and if you paramount to stop conflict and escalation if you prevent mistaken load adversary's president has minutes the unilaterally side facing out launch on warning drastically reduce chance of miscalculated strike by raising costs of the launch. There have been 3 false alarms and if you protect all that is disabled the long-term manner and if used perceived as binding or intense skepticism to understand audience costs the U.S. would tie its rep to sustain with the adherence of validation would have domestic and international ramifications working out fewer damaging rep for honor and commitment such with the speaking confidence and commitments and great doubts about declaratory policy posture shifts with operational changes solve Thacker in 21 could extend its benefits etc. call it 7 feet deep strategic stability couple and if you induce targeted rushing and produce alert levels on the remote modernization postures have cascading effects with operational measures others would be more confident about not being subject to first strike pressures for vertical and horizontal de-escalate. The plan is deep devaluation. It's a necessary step to stop short-term nuclear war and redefine the justifications for nuclear weapons. Ritchie and 14 deep devaluing qualitative changes in nuclear doctrine posture. The practice restricting deterrence move towards disarmament to absorb pragmatic interim measures that not a substitute end goal. Then if you weaken political forces of nuclear weapons, eventually legitimacy of nuclear warfighting, change consumption of nuclear deterrence, restrict deterrent to narrow the restrictedly defined threats of world effort to become free of nuclear weapons. The first essential step is that if they do no weapon consider the legitimate goal calls for the legitimization of nuclear weapons before process must start with the legitimation of the behavioral shift. Debate from state-centric civility to ethics of humanity. Nuclear weapons only cause apathy and study from afar when they're detached from the consequences of use. The plan best informs concern and compassion beyond Pelopidas in 23 our ability to produce collapse and imagine. It makes us further utopians and indicators help in world that people are to think about nuclear war if anti-sensitized their numbing compassion collapse and faulty decision making which destroy for the nearest stop us from executing such inhuman acts. We have become in dire need of exercising imagination. These behavioral factors is evident and more planning to strip out the consequences of the hypothetical was an omission of their interpreted war plans is that just abstraction aids real IR scenario analysis on lecture reflexivity and deconstructs cognitive biases and thinking and advocacy. Lesson 20. Scenario analysis for the gap between theory and real problems. The authors embrace intellectual openness, recognizing greater flexibility and theoretical formulations, the possibility of complementary by other theories, advantage of the scenario analysis, license ability to tackle future events. This method to overcome cognitive biases such as linear degrouping can caused by the subconscious process invites participants to reveal and then question convictions which remain unchallenged and question the linearity of the developments. Foresight helps psychologists exit health provision on Pharisees can be innovative in terms of scholarship and policy rather than offering a reflection to think the unthinkable and innovative research confronts uncertainties that are crucial for policymakers to monitor possibility to accommodate multiple driving forces to take into account different policies and combine them and see how they affect the variable makes scenario analysis unique, providing a tool for actual clarity and understanding issues. Scenario analysis can be a tool towards market change between academia and policymaking that contribute to better understanding between the two to consider long-term trends and enhance relevance of research agenda. Centering the international and IR enables studying everyday balance, Craigie and 20 international ability to be interested in how the international that is conceive structures the domestic, the state, the everyday. That is not just that we should say that everyday to understand the international, but the contrary, we should say that impacts of the international on different aspects of life. The theory of literacy emphasizes that societal processes of interaction could constitute impact on other all societies. International should be the through structural condition of multiplicity entails analysis of multiple contingent modalities of structuring by the international state of power should track these processes, how the contingent model pervasive international shape life. Do you want me to read anything else?
Which one do you want?
A minute, 15.
Oh, Jesus.
Mobilizing against extinctions and desirable ethics, Stephenson 18 imagine futures with survival whilst imagining humans become extinct. Pessimism did not preclude working towards collective effort to address nuclear issues. Responsibilities of researchers were to raise awareness and demonstrate the link between inaction and survival should be primary responsibility of scholars to engage in survival issues. IR should not be afraid to think the worst and salvage requirements of the world. Futurism is necessary to survival. That this future was not a liberal view of progress. Think the cold ways of perceiving time marginalized and diminished contingency and the agency of actors and change agency is neither temporally close nor deterministic is rooted in contingency.
Prospects.
Let me time. But yeah. Okay. Good.
What makes Russia a defensive power?
Within the context of nuclear relations, our Perkovich and body evidence say that they model the U.S.'s pressure to use. It's not that they're a defensive power broadly, but that their nuclear posture is reactive.
They model the U.S.'s desire to use? Is that what you said?
The Perkovich and body evidence says that Russia does not view nuclear weapons as a necessity for security, but an answer to wicked problems, i.e., they think they have to have a nuclear arsenal to have a second strike capability against the U.S.'s first strike capability.
Okay. I think that makes sense. The Gupta evidence says, quote, Russia views the U.S. with deep hostility and mistrust. Why is that?
I don't know if the one I see defines the particular reason why that is. What is the implication of this question?
Well, in the context of Gupta, it's because of our launch on warning policy. So given that we have TNWs forward deployed in Eastern European theater, our ICBMs on alert, as well as a posture that is set to LOW, Russia believes that we are using our BMD for second strike because we're about to launch a disarming counterforce first strike at them.
Okay, and that is why they view the U.S. with deep hostility and mistrust?
Yes.
Okay. The next question I have regards the Ritchie evidence, Vadillo evidence, which says that the AF is a quote decoupling of nuclear weapons from the broad day-to-day calculus of national security. What does that mean?
I think you're asking about the Ritchie evidence, but that evidence says that in the status quo, the U.S.'s first strike posture values weapons as a political tool that is designed to get concessions from other nations, i.e. we lowered a first strike threat over Russia with the belief that that creates a deterrence or an ability to force them into compliance. The Ritchie evidence is that shifting our policy.
No, this is definitely Vadillo that read this, but so I'm asking about that particular portion. What does it mean to decouple nuclear weapons from the day-to-day calculus of national security?
So in this context, it's about the nuclear warfighting strategy the U.S. is employing. Right now, we can use nuclear first use threats as a way to sort of extract political concessions or back Russia into a corner, deter them from, well, this is a scenario we're saying is going to happen, but U.S. warhawks use nuclear first use threats in order to deter a potential Russian invasion. The plan would decouple the strategy of military planners from being able to use those threats in order to, deter an aggressive nuclear Russia.
From being able to use those threats. Okay. I think I'm good.
When is the reset? Maybe one case.
First off, to critique the one I see as part and parcel with the accidentalization of war and the ethical responsibility for conflict displaced by narrating the war as a product of technical error rather than global regime imperial circling development. And 17, the accidental war is not war, it's accident, the mobilization of event machine, the event machine, controversy, the notion of the mechanic of subject, repetition of the events, totalitarian singularity, thinking, performing, calling, question, assumptions, in the era of mechanized quantity, augment, genocide, and war on terror against the opposition, international, intentional, the excuse reaction toward the sovereign right to stand about the consequence of the evisceration of the encounter, the collaterally damage of the death of proper enemy war have become the after-historic certainties and an economy of mastery that how to potentialize, meaning containerized wars, the offshoring of governmentality through sight, specific installations of sovereignty. The drone is a heuristic like the sovereign and the kill chain. The nuclear taboo is endemic, the colonial hegemony of time that reinforces civilizational mantras. The West versus the rest while advancing logics of race science that cascades colonize people's technology backwards, rejecting math or in 20 liter assumptions, articulating temporal structure of the first and West and elsewhere frame a singular secular time that envelops under the dial of covalence to the ground for lucha many civilization discourse. This recommend the colonized way to encourage saying not yet to somebody else's discourse of control by the U.S. is the purpose of seeking to protect which country are likely to build nuclear weapon threat and prevailing military strategy as strategic status quo and narrow the gates of a nuclear sword. Society discipline failed to appreciate history of nuclearism, politics, as war discurses based on races, based on pacified universality. The West constructing modern science, rational man, European by cascading non-European cultures with folk explanation, embedded local belief systems and precursors to true science. Placing conditions on nuclear weapons is inextricable from the economy of force by which nukes derive their meaning, transforming nuclear weapons into diplomatic bargaining chips as a form of commodity fetish system that you should reject. Biswas and 14 nuclear weapons as luxury fetish. Nuclear weapons become exemplars of luxury goods and international symbolic and security economy, symbolic virtuously line communicating power, modernity, nuclear weapons acquisition, repudiation are articulated through implicit recognition of that symbolic economy, emitting restriction of supply via institutional controls of those who can possess nuclear weapons. Increase demand for weapons. Nuclear weapons is valuable because it serves to carry social value. All attempts to halt to prevent proliferation also serve to enhance value. Taboos against nuclear use are not taboos against possession, only reinforces deterrence. It's not just a strategy, it's also functions the way that becomes a privilege. Instruments of internationally dominant states ruling class deterrence arms control and national security ideology. Fetish objects symbolic value serves to make the power real. Reification of nuclear weapons, making Objects of deep desire, linguistic tricks and deterrence impose restrictions on the supply consumption have designating nuclear weapons as a status qualitative of different kind of subject distinguished from conventional weapons as part of the subnormal category of WMD. Even those explicitly reject nuclear weapons accept the distinctiveness of the status too dangerous to use yet necessary to possess to prevent their use. Nuclear decision making involves the making of nuclear meanings and values to both sides. Nuclear desires to show evidence of nuclear weapons to sustain massive political economy of weapons ideology helps secure consistent consent to the logic of nuclear security so that nuclear policymakers desire the nuclear fetish even understand the opposite danger fetish system of the weapon to secure the political economy. Nuclear violence institutionalized sustain the nuclear war preparation included if nuclear nukes become so fetishized and the road from latent capability to break out is always a precarious one. Their theory of the world is wrong and racist and relies on Western conceptions of sovereignty, racialized depictions of anarchy absent Western values, assumes a white, rational neoliberal subject at the core of decision making means that you should overcorrect in debates about international relations. Hobson 22, liberal, constructive progressive politics where racism evaporates race calls, point to a recurring dark cycle where racial victory the ground on day cycle entails fair moments of victory rolled back by white IR becoming a race value positive pressure through which racial hatred become exercised by reality on new world the expensive racism replaced by subliminal cultural racist monoids and Western academic distance self and racist shows but reaffirm them in why West term divides society of racism did not mean the end racist thinking scholarly discourse in IR theorists and non-racist bats first racist move whitewashes racism and white world politics contemplated by the second in which IR advances racist analysis of political economy that appears neutral stability possible racist decision by superpowers to obscure the world, the Global South Organization, a peace and center of violence in the periphery for third world of continuous starting in 1878, where Congress then divided Africa, the racist underpinnings of liberal theories are filtered, leaving the claims about state transmorphied into objective universalist propositions. Scholars persist in ignoring these arguments, pervading silence can only be excused historical amnesia. What matters is racist impact, regardless of intent. The 1AC attempts to smooth the relations between Russia, which causes an international alliance of whiteness, rejected. It turns case Arnold in Roma 13. Russia has witnessed high hate, violence on racial minorities. Cared about the neo-Nazi necessary to pay attention to nuances, details, and ideology. Why the far right in Russia advocated racial hygiene. Why the shared by European far right groups to seek support of the relate to European counterparts for trans Europe and Russia overcoming perceived shared challenges, perceiving national genotype. These questions have real consequences designing policies. While Russia and the right take anti-Western position, the future of the world represents a Western far rights in the union with forces in the East, a racial union with the most secure due to what participants see in circularity value construct. Such a concept reflects the belief in clash of civilization, given lead to the appearance of objective reality deals with motivations. The idea of Euro-Russia is a retreat for white people and Euro-Russia is a bulwark against liberalizing forces. The alternative is to engage in a hermeneutic of suspicion and categorically reject whiteness at every turn that requires rejecting the 1AC and over-prioritizing the alternative by Cybermatism. And 20, what would it mean to reimagine study deep mythology decentered by both required epistemological situations requires alertness to contrast of Eurocentrism of choosing a whiteness, loyalty, and humanity principle. Totally deconstructs research to great powers would still be possible explicitly. Would have to embrace internal diversities, much more attention would need to be paid. Coordinable almost all projects would be informed by hermeneutic suspicion, uphold the rigor, which makes persistence of racialized ignorance impossible. In the absence of this theory, will continue to be white. Thou, the case. First, misdisclosure is the voting issue. Bryant was included in the pre-round, not read, not included in a document. Despite a minute of time that creates a moral hazard that skirts any of debate's potential, so at worst, it means you should reject their clash of fairness arguments on framework now. The turn, the age of state-centric politics is over. Their paradigm fails to address interactions via Westphalian instructions pad. And 20, wholeness is central to bombs, ontological interpretation, and Cyrus scholars focus on international values. These factors are best in structural abstraction, systematic features are part and parcel of the whole that are seen. External and causal determinants are systematic part and parcel of the whole that are seen as causal. External and causal determinants are reducible rather than the whole in holographic sense. By whole, we mean the entirety of space inside their whole. Goes well beyond the state until the interaction the body's social and ecological system of wholeness should be a higher ontological priority. The world did not start off as fragmented parts pre-existent states, so the other way around, the whole permeates through the parts. This makes it imperative to look at relations in context artificial card of the hour. The tiny coronavirus can be enfolded in that corner and turn the global life upside down. Ping pong diplomacy, Chernobyl flight school in Florida, use subprime crisis, Fukushima, WikiLeaks, Tutsanian street render might be localized holes that reflecting the Cold War, 9/11 financial crisis, Trump, and the pandemic. It's important to remember the as-if caveat. A quantum perspective becomes imperative in the face of mounting global environmental crisis and economic development, international conflict, planetary survival, contrary to approach to subordinate environmental issues to state-centric and national economic imperatives. That classical decision theory is unfalsifiable, ignores the superpositions of state preferences. I mean, you should invalidate every prediction of the 1AC. Durden and Wendt 20. The question is whether superposition can be found in the macroscale opposition. Is challenged by quantum theory. Classical decision theory assumes that people have a portfolio of preference. According to rational theory, the context of the mind will always be a well-defined state pressure promise determining others types. So interaction with the optimal thing, security dilemma theory, the ideal Bayesian reactor under certainty represents state superposition and modeled as a distinct factor in n-dimensional space. These do not collapse until a measurement occurs. This exact opposite standard view rather than expression of underlying belief that latter will become well-defined through measurement itself. Scenario planning creates disembodied subject which robs IR of its potential to suss evidence. It's about multivariable scenario planning, not linear one. ones like the 1AC, so they cannot solve their turn, but we have offense, Wilcox, and 15 body. Bidding outside the IR, the language of control and risk management dominates security, presents and disembodied subject and actors. The object of security become the protected, understood as bodies whose breathe, suffer, and die. Security studies have implicit conceptions of bodies and organisms and protection from the damage constitute security, and IR bodies are relevant only as if they live or die. Bodies objects exist, manipulate, possess no agency, the rise embodiment, and provides challenge to sovereignty. Security in IR impoverishes itself, comprehends bodies and objects, subjects are formed through relations. IR is lacking violence made more than an action of actors or the violation of norms. Cannot see the violence can be a force of shaping how we understand ourselves and somebody can well form community to understand war requires us to pay attention to how bodies are racialized through relations. Being IR scholar, reverse qualification method. And 5, people who make predictions as experts know better than the rest of us section and verse relations, self-confidence, in-depth and knowledge or system and expertise, rewards, bad judgment, tell pick 284, would Gurpha be outed, would US go to war? Experts made 82,361 forecasts, perform worse than equal probability. Human beings spend their lives studying the world and are poor forecasters and dart-throwing monkeys. Specialists are not significantly more reliable than non-specialists. We reach diminishing predictive returns starting a career. There's no reason top journalists are betting on the attentive readers to want more than 100 strikes as almost all the people who do not better. We fall in love with our hunches. We think the think thinker stare studies professors are out to entertain, to predict futures is not obvious. The expert suffers from knowing too much information and solicited to support the Panthers. Chains of causation. If you look forward, it's a random scatter of dots leading to many possible outcomes. We have no theories to our observation of foreign land government observation that we present to we knew all along. Experts misremember probability by tending to find scenarios with more variables and experiment with the professional forecasters who such complete suspension of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Soviet Union, another of a Russian invasion and a complete suspension of diplomatic relations. The expert judged the second scenario more likely than the first, and thought that required 2 separate events to occur. Lower scores like hedgehog thinkers aggressively extend reach to one big thing, continue debates. High scores that look like foxes, skeptical grand schemes, and hedgehog sees international conflict can be determined by a single force, balance, power considerations, clash of civilization, great man theory, actor, dispensability thesis, predictions that fail are only off on timing. Foxes don't see a single determining explanation to see the world as shifting mixture of self-fulfilling prophecies.
Good.
Yep.
Can you kick follow-up?
No.
The Arnold evidence, what is the implication for the U.S. adopting a no first use policy in terms of the International Alliance of Whiteness?
We've read this link argument to describe, to turn the arguments that you made about describing Russia as defensive. We think that Russia's motivations, or describing Russia's motivations as purely defensive.
Okay, what are Russia's nuclear motivations?
Racialization.
Okay.
They
why?
seek to dominate the world, and nuclear weapons are the hammer.
It's true
that
in
results.
1AC evidence as well.
Yep.
The reason why they're using the threat of use in Ukraine, for instance, is not tied to just being reactive to the U.S., but
Correct.
because they have geostrategic incentives, and
Okay, they've-
mainly this idea that Ukraine is a part of Russia, that it's part
Can you
of that.
explain the conflict in Ukraine and the nuclear saber rattling, particularly through racialization?
So our argument is that the nuclear umbrella is what permits the power of racialization to continue. So it is the hammer that
How
allows
does
Russia
Russia's
to
nuclear threat
continue
in Ukraine-
enforcing
The
racialization
thing I just
upon
said about they believe that
the-
ethnic minorities in Ukraine are part of Russia. So
Okay.
I mean, that's like a major
and they
reason
use
why
nuclear
they
weapons
believe
as
they
the
made-
symbolic economy to enforce, racialization upon those people.
Which card or which part of the 1AC do you think substantiates that the way in which Russia wants to sort of reclaim territory and the near abroad is driven by their nuclear posture?
We have read an Arnold piece of evidence that says all support for Russian policies are driven by the theory of racialization. You have read a card that says that they're defensive in the context of nuclear policy. Obviously, the 1AC isn't going to say the opposite. We've read a link to saying
I mean,
that as bad.
it's the premise behind the Goldston card, which begins with exactly that phrase. So the premise of that is about how Russia has that geostrategic incentive to, quote, retake control over its near abroad. And that's the context from which escalation.
And that Goldston evidence starting is actually not
I
about
have
nuclear
one
policy.
question. The Durkheimian evidence
Yeah.
on case that says classical decision-making theory is bad. What is the implication of this on NAF's nuclear theory of Russia that it's not like a typecast of all of their international relations?
Well, it does. Defensive realism assumes
NAF does
classical
not say
decision
that
theory.
Russia is defensive realist.
Excuse me?
NAF does not say that Russia is defensive realist.
It says the idea that
It's the
it's nuclear.
implication of this argument.
Well,
that we
no,
just
the
can't
idea
know
that
anything about
nuclear,
foreign nations.
the idea that it's nuclear decision making is based on a defensive reaction to the United States certainly uses the security
Okay.
dilemma theory. We've indicted the security dilemma theory.
Well, the Durkheimian evidence is like an indictive typecasting.
Incorrect.
What is the
Durkheim and Wendt, quote, think security dilemma
Well, it
theory.
applies that indictment to the security dilemma theory.
And
but
we've
is
applied
the
security
warrant for
dilemma
that
theory
is
to 1AC.
what is the distinction between making the claim that all of Russia's actions are driven by racialization and the claim that all of Russia's actions are driven, or Russia's nuclear actions are driven by
Because
nuclear-
racialization does not say that there's an ideal rational actor operating under
Also,
uncertainty.
we're not saying that it's exclusively driven only by
Okay,
racialization.
you did just said that like 30 seconds ago. But, okay. Do you-
Yeah.
Are y'all taking part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're done.
nuclear extinction outweighs first use posture structurally risk miscalculated nuclear escalation. That's the only scenario for escalation. Every state knows they cannot escalate to de-escalate, and if you restores mutual vulnerability, it creates off-ramps and great power rewards. That's the pretty much evidence. Disclosure theory we meet, it was in the one I see we read round 3. Counter tradition, we can read no cards. With disclosing the plan X, 1 reciprocal, 1 and C need not be disclosed. That creates an asymmetric prep burden with the neg. Gets from the 1 and C pre-round, but we don't get to prefer the 1 and C. 2 arbitrariness, only our own burden to prove the resolution true. They make it impossible for the app to win. When the Wi-Fi goes out, the parent comes out late, or if somebody has to go to the bathroom. The first 2 arguments, no one actor has their argument is that no one actor has a determining effect in foreign policy. It's wrong. The accidents and miscalculations stereo leave one actor responsible for nuclear retaliation in face of a false alarm or attacks in the cyber space domains. That case, the only plan creates escalation off ramps that prevent any one warhawk from destroying the world. The fact that U.S. preeminence is declining in the Westphalian world order demonstrates that we should not cling to the U.S. preeminence via nuclear weapons. Rejecting IR scholarship as practice creates openings for far right co-option. There's no single disciplinary impulse within IR. Mickelson 21 defining terms of business in relation to IR discipline. Great condition for right for viewing any theory as problematic. Idea critique necessity moving beyond IR has become a trope glimpse of a critical IR become hostage to risk of being exposed in insufficiently pure modern faces colonial traces. Critique hits form of testing scholars free given criteria. This ignores theories that the contradictory purposes fictional the world by scholars moving beyond IR can be just as problematic and embrace scholars movements and then bar research that thinking against a goalless order or incorporating this as influential among populist politicians, race realists, Western chauvinist and no white talk can lead to marginalization, competitive victimology, and essentially identity politics solution are tautologically about opposition. They lead to relevance accounts that offer little value theories and for no allied ethics. There's no weeds of sovereign modernity that forms the superstructure of IR. The same tools are mobilized by race and gender absolutists. The critical IR provides no tools to counter relativistic arguments. Believe the critical requires exit from IR. They desire from rigorous critique. Federal scholars are mechanical to make the same gesture. There will be defenses of sovereignty as well as IR on the critique, which answers the internal impact of the first 2 arguments. They say we're not multivariable. IR the one I see is multinodal because it says that miscalculation is a process, not an event. The fact that we cannot know the intentions of individual actors, like we can know a human as a reason to take virtues off the table because it can only result in mass extinction. The last card Menard is wrong. Past predictions being wrong is not a reason to castigate empiricism. The one I see is defense of a specific scenario, not scenario planning broadly. We say a holistic methodology to investigate international studies on the Russian nuclear weapons posture, dialogue, and historical tendencies to derive a specific conclusion that demonstrates that the burden for the links on the critique should be being about nuclear war specifically. Now, the K at the top, framework, weigh the plan for the justifications provided. The ultima solves their impacts. Evaluating epistemology alone is bad. 1. Fairness. It justifies floating pigs, we knew the 1AC, and eliminating the 2AC prep burden. Floating pigs independently are bad because it moves the amendments of the 1AC and forces us to debate ourselves to clash loosely security politics, causing race to the margins and including intersectional epistemologies. Debates over material strategies are key to assess trade-offs and test their thesis. Scenario analysis turns the alt, subjecting their theories of communication and power to contingent. Scenario analysis breaks down cognitive bias and forces critical reflexivity and innovation. That sus their model is conservatism in disguise, rejecting pragmatic policies to create epistemological purity straight off the imperial playbook. Vigors 20 positioning language of epistemic violence suggests that colors revolutionary snapping at West are always to combat oppression and educational spheres coming to make our enemies calls for authenticity, legitimate preservation, versus automatic values upon which scholars rely. Epistemological difference are to be solid we should generalize with. Caution claims the champions of Walter reproduces Eurocentrism, extortion to think otherwise than contesting coloniality, apply no coherent program, and negative gender critiques of coloniality. The whole track of field predication is intoxicating, likely to inspire contracted contribution to address problems, likely to do the opposite and deliver cascade with nationalism moving more than happy for scholars of fomenting against Westfall, embracing epistemological difference, defense on data colonial center to conservative and back watches the status quo externally and solves the nuclear learning impact by fostering empathy about nuclear decision making that outweighs there's a paradigmatic imperative to understand work plans that tease out the hypotheticals to create collective empathy and address structural violence and domestic and international fears. That's Pelopidas and Turkey. The nuclear war outweighs 1. Use consequentialism. Nuclear policy must be approached contingently because extinction is irreversible and precludes ethical value. 2. Mobilizing against extinction is valuable. Scholarship has an ethical obligation to produce a livable world through futurism and preserve the relationalities that give life to life subjective value. You should not use futurism as a tool of liberalism, but as a contingent force that can be redeployed. That's a Stevens evidence. Perm. Do both. NFU is essential component of dismantling the internal debate. The plan shifts the debate from realist readings of stability to an ethics of common humanity. Delegitimizing the role of nuclear use and armament. Prefer Ritchie specific to NFU and the orientation with which we should approach nuclear politics, which is the frame with which the alternative engages in. The accidents link. 1. The perm shields that the alternative cannot be invested in disarmament without intermediary restrictions on nuclear use. If the alternative is not disarmament, it cannot solve the link because keeping nuclear systems intact and on alert is the status quo. 2. Turn. If the deconstruction policy relevant notion of nuclear weapons for nuclear antagonism that devalues possession and deterrence. That's a Ritchie evidence. 3. No accidents link. Analyzing individual accidents straight critical context raises awareness about human culpability to adjust risk. That's Eiler. 13. The exception that attention to cultural and accident creates a teleological understanding. Text not alone. Subject for to a conclusion, namely advice to do desires. Instead, they call up imagination that gambles with tech that we take attention that is always to do actions. There's a predetermined ontological strategy. Sometimes one makes it over to discovery while media can know actions they how this affect what traffic jam melting the accidents on the news laws or encounter which provides insider historical for critics. The accident is an object to have turned over reason root plan for individual accident and said they can be understood within historical context particular to time and place and attend to the terms attentions. The accident Point secondary crisis, individual culpability in terms of and beyond. Control the action should be studying the term as revealing substance. The civilizational discourse link of the master evidence, it relies on the thesis of it is wrong lot. And 20, I disagree with the Eurocene of the system is working would be dying up, but it seems strange there is no way to get that we get through without doing contact research for the research. For the research check, I did not see anything European about monitoring. Well, air did not begin without takeover Western Hemisphere. Any Eurasian actor kind of done the same thing. The first was born in China, agriculture, comes in Middle East and India, trying to move from industrialization into Japan. I've held that position. Where am I in the card? Geopolitics are likely to get us out as they are to escape. How will we escape from extinction? Depend on countries. The fact on neoliberalism not caused by realism, but prevented. I see real geopolitics as a guarantee of ideological, economic, and ecological diversity. The BISWAS evidence. 1. It's the status quo. U.S. warhawks use nuclear first-use threats to attempt to deter aggressive Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. The plan deconstructs the states. The status of nukes as valuable for those purposes. That's Ritchie. 2. The NFU solves the possession links, removing the subject of belief in turns as a prerequisite to disarm, plus the operational changes restrict the role of the arsenal in the first place. Dismantling the nuclear order is existential in the terms all slogan. 15. Disarm is dangerous and difficult to identify. Alternative can use to limit competition to avoid a nuclear competition officers unstoppable. Nuclear deterrent reduce the defense on nukes. Force visibility if a world was one big resource tell. Break commitments have enormous benefits of reversing nuclear regime. Fall apart completely documented as cause. Cascade a prolific goal transition until threats are led to nukes are permanently limited difficult to envision. Disarm not to say disarm and abandon to contrary US move out being forward produce arsenals that capable and if you risk war really reduce ability to maintain the arsenals and not reach zero into reduce zero. Now the sovereignty link defenses of IR will be on their alternative which answers the terminal total refusal of sovereignty prevents effective challenges of power turns the alternatives ability to solve this link. Shulman 21 non-sovereign refusal from captive and whatever democratic mystery of power disavowing participation and ruling out anti-democratic interests. We imagine that gender thrives only by refusing but also through the structure and even if freedom requires not only fight from role but also into acknowledge a fearful tension between informal form and organized power find politically without in the terms of which just how decision and how about which practices are being rolled out and occurs they rework organized power as democratic forms of political highlights foreclosures and sociality automated by ontology commonality as regenerated only when people make public declaration and exit this collective power to promote a collectivity power opening brain forms that express democratic collective life fugitive democracy and demonstrate practice of concealment and public action dangers they are contradictory in physical ways in concert. They view institution as cynical to white supremacy so far but as instrument sort and masturbatory and freedom lies not in the permanent vision of Leviathan but in taming it localism first from freedom is gold by Fanny Luke Hamer but not her organizing the threat to actual democratic politics. Historical examples are not definitive unfinished examples that could be good to retrieve and refashion. The Russia theorization arguments racialization cannot explain the nuclear umbrella or deterrence. Crossek said that all Russian policy is motivated by racialization or Gupta, Halberland, Taylor evidence say Russia will only use nukes if they don't have a credible second strike option, which demonstrates that in the context of nuclear power, the aggression is mirrored, and they are monitoring U.S. modernization as mirroring U.S. modernization as well. That's a paragraphic evidence. Utopian international fiats are voting issue. Infinite actors over such research and justifies object fiat like countries should end wars was just my off ground. It's anti-educational and illogical because no decision maker could choose between two, which distorts the literature. If the alternative solves it, they should have a link specific to nuclear politics and not just IR broadly. The alternative fails. Every recuperates neocolonial domination, abandoning juridical bodies, forfeits rights of self-determination. Also means it cannot restrict legal power, which means that it can't solve the nuclear war impacts of the case tell. And 20 anti-colonial national site deploys international nations and through links operated in global juridical body, but as you contract the right of self-determination, other dynamic power represents imperial order hierarchies continue after decol and neocolonialism regional hierarchies persist within this understanding. Understanding besides self-determination as non-domination and individual can be free in the absence of coercion. Decol should be understood as internationalism of the nation state. The alt non-Western thought reduces political analysis to cultural difference, redefining imperial order. Murray 19 anti-Eurocentric scholars reproducing imperial division of the world realists essentialize the character of non-Western actors. Global alternatives are all on an older bifurcation with while the West has knowledge and the non-West has culture. These common trouble construction of the hegemonic national philosophy reduction difference to cultural categories led to the reduction of the groups of their worst intellectual claims are ambiguous and can be put to different uses under one corpus of the world in separate realms that define some cultural distinction for predominant black people or would not universally denied as relegated worlds within some hierarchy. Blackness is not generalizable. What a reminder to pay attention to the specificity of relation to differences obscured by the assumption that there are black and white ideas which can be mapped onto social realities as a two amenable to imperial order rather than building an agenda that problematizes the divide claims that one non-Western must make it itself autonomous presupposes of non-Western as fixed and it follows the substance be taken to purify the non-Western of Western traits.
On the case, you read an IR card. I don't think you set it up.
Oh, yeah, sure. I just resent the doc and resaved it, so it should be in there.
Let me know when you're good.
Okay.
Okay, so first, framework. What does it mean to weigh the plan for the justifications provided?
So it means that if the links must be about the plan, like its actions.
But
and the alternatives.
my question is a little more about the second part. What does it mean for something to be for the justifications provided?
We would say the advantages for the plan are the justifications provided for them. So like preventing nuclear
And
war.
how do you weigh the plan in the context of justifications?
Well, maybe that's a little bit divorced from framework. It becomes, I guess, sort of blurry. We've made arguments about consequentialism.
Correct.
And why that's the frame in which you
Yes.
should
Yeah,
evaluate.
so we'll get to that question in a second.
Right.
The first question I have is floating picks are bad because?
Moot the 1AC.
Okay.
should make-
And so now, coming back to the consequentialism thing, what is the relationship between debate and solving the consequential effects of nuclear war?
The thesis of the 1AC in relationship to the 2AC framework arguments is that since we've made these arguments about contingency, we should not sort of have this foregone conclusion that nuclear war is inevitable. Instead, we should
Sure. I got all that. I'm saying, what is the relationship between debate and resolving conflicts like nuclear war?
Right, so Mian and Pelopita sort of talks about the ways in which the information processing described in our sus evidence can be used to sort of deconstruct
Who's
opaque-
information processing? Like debaters?
Yeah,
That
debaters are the
influences
ones.
nuclear policy how? You've read a scenario that short-term nuclear war with Russia's coming now. We obviously can't change
Sure.
any of that.
That's sort of something the 1AC disagrees with. It's not something we can like directly change
So
with
then
the
why is
ballot.
it
However,
relevant in a ballot if the scope of solvency is beyond the ability to
That was
change
sort of
it?
the second thing I was going to get to with the
Okay.
Mian and Pelopidas evidence.
Yep.
It says that deconstructing the sort of opacity behind nuclear decision making, such as the executive's ability such as executive sole authority, is
Sure.
one way that we can raise awareness about the risks
But
and
who are you raising awareness to?
like within the debate community, we've
And
made
that
arguments like
solves extinction how? So I'm trying to see, like, you've read
right.
the
right.
impact to consequentialism you read is extinction DA to the alt, but the internal link doesn't get there. So how is raising awareness, knowing cool facts about nuclear weapons resolve any of that?
The reason the internal link does get there is because Pelopidas says the reason that the executive gets away with sole authority is because those information systems
You
are
are not
opaque.
challenging Biden. Anyways, I'll move on. The Murray evidence says only political analysis is key. What does it mean for something to be political?
It's not necessarily that only political analysis is key. It's that this distinction between culture and politics, i.e. the West has politics while the non-West has culture.
Where
is
did
something
we do that?
problems. It's an idea that we should reject IR for that reason because it's inherently
we
Western.
reject IR because
First-
non-Western
first
people
card
have
on the-
culture.
First card on
We
the
said
case.
culture is political. We said that distinction is
You've
bad.
said that's the reason. Well, you've said that's the reason we need to deconstruct IR. Murray says that IR can be used in order to deconstruct that distinction in the first place, and that saying that IR is
So,
inherently
okay.
indebted to that distinction is something that's wrong.
We said that. Okay. Ted.
7:30. I just sent it. It's the critique straight down.
Is there an overview?
No.
Okay.
Sir? It's just the K straight down. From where you could.
One second.
Good.
Framework Alpha must justify the benefits presented to the 1AC prior to plan evaluation if and only if the 1AC positive rhetoric is impactful, i.e. 1AC offense predicting a nuclear reps and that must disprove the discussion produced by the 1AC with links to justifications, intrinsic advantages, and solvency, illusionary whiteness, DA, 320, nuclear possession, and book to fear of French by other structure on a cake, through sexual quantization, they do so want to generalize the moderate such as geographic, psychological countercrimes, and enormous concerns to release such misplaced emphasis the ability through simulation, abstraction, marginalization of historical analysis, highlight racialized practices, use the goal order, cascade for like a rear racial arguments of the constitutional order, emphasize the need to neutralize the element of conscious, equalize race, because in a matter of representation and fairness. It's the myth of permanence. It can't be an intrinsic good because competition is ever evolving. There's no procedural plan focused arguments. No rule for neg. Prioritize fairness in practice, not principle. Fair evaluation doesn't occur for arguments because of proceduralism akin to victims or racism, losing a court case on technicalities, and we don't justify picks, but they do because picks allow weighing the plan and alt solves those impacts. So it's justified under their interpretation. Ours given this, putting the 1AC is good. It holds them accountable for racist practices in debate, and the reciprocity that weighs consequences is worse because it treats us worse for demanding the community be better, and sidelines violence felt here for consequences of a hypothetical and precludes meaningful participation. Debates benefits clash. One F choice in for first and last, and the 1AC construction check. We're merely asking them to defend why they introduced the 1AC and its limited claims to yes, link, you lose. Epistemology critiques are themselves. Epistemology critiques the relevant consequences only to the introduction and research of the 1AC. 3 transgression, the rush of the margins for negative C via utopian knowledge and critiques who think shapes scholars or process counterpoints under their interpretation. Now their skills stuff via isn't key to it, pushes past political barriers and key to teach you how to develop true nuclear expertise. Our interpretation solves better, forcing confrontation with theory and scholarship at a more proximate level. Sus relies on public debates, which is in this space. The endpoint is only education about nukes, which we've straight turned per our framework interpretation, and distancing makes us more apathetic instead of focusing on what we can control, i.e. research. Vickers is wrong. Conservatism isn't justified under our framework because war crimes also have bad intentions and justifications behind them. Most war crimes were committed by actors who considered the consequences anyway, so they can't solve it because those people just intentionally accepted those bad consequences. Debate is over obsessed with problem solving instead of posing relevant questions. Apathy comes from the plethora of plans without creating a grammar to understand the world in the first place and figure out which problems to attack it. Now, the impact to overcorrect for white privilege when evaluating critiques of racism in Percy and IR, there are no link arguments or manifestation of white silence that creates a self-fulfilling delusion within academia that feeds with a white denial, which is our Hobson evidence. Reject your ethical predisposition to existential threats. Debate is trains us to conflate consequentialist ethics with utilitarianism is the only moral frame. It's racist because slavery, Jim Crow, colonization, and the Persian-industrial complex were all justified by white being. Maximizing the greater good, decentering whiteness requires an unlearning of white paradigms of impact framing. The alt solves through disconnecting war from violence. It's not serial killer logic to prioritize ongoing suffering over future threats. The inverse is true because they justify continued bloodshed to secure a white future. Debate does shape social formation because of in-depth academic research, even if there's not a one-to-one correspondence between round and personal opinion. You should presume it does and elevate violent scholarship to procedural violations, refusing to reward it with a ballot. Now, the permutations, they're non-starters. Links are all DAs that each firm severs, which is a VI. For education, argument of responsibility, not forcing AF to commit to their scholarship or lens is bad because it means they get away with unethical advocacy. It makes critique debates far worse because the perm outline becomes unbeatable. Now, the accidents link, this isn't closed. The nuclear ability to develop offense, given they claim they could deconstruct policy relevant in nuclear antagonism, but the premise of our link is that they reproduce it and they have no offense for inclusion of accidents rhetoric in the 2AC. Accidents or miscalculation are merely the intended outcomes of the nuclear era. The framing of nuclear war as accidental consequence participates in an epistemological schema that absolves policymakers of their intentional advance and actions to impact one colonial silencing. The papers over the intentions of nuclear war, weapons construction, testing on indigenous communities that wiped hundreds of thousands off the planet, and eradicated cultures throughout the last 70 years, none of which were accidents but intentional advance. Two, it's only an accident because they believe they were divorced from the small coordinate that built and tested nukes, which is exemplary of a broader process of how debaters inevitably pretend to create policies via scenario planning, etc. Only run away and say they don't have to defend the justifications behind the plan per framework. Even if they blame the impetus for a conflict on nuclear posture, they view use itself as an accident, and threats can be real, but that doesn't make them accidental. The alt refuses to recognize the absence moral truth of accidents and doesn't justify nuclear use, which will be below. Their Eiler evidence is neg. Quote, with technology, we do not always lead to accidents, and quote, technology does not limit the subject to a foregone conclusion. This card is answering the Virilio K of accidents, saying the accident doesn't exist. In other words, human subjects are in control of technology, so accidents aren't real, which invalidates the case and is offense for our link argument. This turns and outweighs the app, justifies massive Western imperialism and war, no different than the U.S. teaching its students it was okay to nuke Japan because it was claimed at the time to be necessary to end the war, the Bush invasion of Iraq, which leaned into imperfect knowledge in order to justify the murder of 850,000 grounded black civilians. Second is slight civility link. There are justifications for NFU are rooted in civilizational discourses that indulge in silent war against racialized threats. This conceptual template enables those rendered as the West to impute political strategic objectives and purposes that are informed by fears and prejudice that assume the rest are too irresponsible and irrational to be trusted with nuclear weapons, hence the systematic risk of their possession. That's my third. Mott is vaguely about Grove Zero seen in a book review with no warrants that aren't answered below, and we didn't read any Grove argument. Yes, link. One, when you see Richie says the quote, reinforces the fire break between the use of conventional and nuclear weapons, unquote. Two, when you see Vadillo claims the AF is, quote, decoupling of nuclear weapons from the broad day-to-day calculus of national security. Three, when you see Halperin says changes must, quote, strengthen the 75 norm against use, unquote, erasing the history, which was largely above. 2AC defense is wrong. Justifications like theirs for NFU is how nuclearism becomes hegemonic because their taboo against use reinforces the fetish of nukes as carriers of social value. The idea that nukes are qualitatively accepts the distinctiveness of their status, reinforcing an arc of redemption which justifies more insidious forms of militarization. Our alternative requires rejection of all of these, even if individual states might find them worse. For the people on the ground, they're just as bad. 2AC Olgan is a double turn with, quote, removing the intersubjective deterrence belief, unquote, because it is a defensive deterrence theory which proves their internal contradictions and demonstrates they reignite American imperial dominance in IR and posits the U.S. as the global policeman in U.S. and arms control. The impact is quotidian imperial violence against subaltern subjects, which turns the case because it greenlights the U.S. as shame third world countries that are seen as threats to the regime of deterrence, castigating anti-imperialist movements throughout the global south, refusing imperial domination as enemies of white empire. Turns the case as well because the 1AC Gupta evidence says, quote, Russia views the U.S. with deep hostility and mistrust, so even the slightest conflicting signal about intention would be enough to justify preemptive action, unquote. The 1AC posits Russia is solely defensive, yet also acknowledge, quote, Russia has geostrategic interest in retaking control over its near abroad, unquote. Per 1AC Goldston, internalization of deterrence fails, and all of this contradiction stuff demonstrates that this is a contradiction and is conflicting signals that would lead to and justify preemptive action. Now, the IR thing, IR can be reflexive, and we're not a total refusal of sovereignty, and it's necessary for them, but our links are assumptive of their reform. So even if IR theory broadly might be minimalist, the 1AC's application of that is not. Now, the Russia Harmony link, this was really beefed by the 2AC, and they do not get new 1AR answers because we read an explicit card about this. Even if they have reasons why it might explain their scenario, they have no offense to our link argument about how the AF's defensive approach to Russia seeks to pacify otherness into a discourse of peaceful cohabitation. The AF extends harmony via reciprocity and scripting reactivity onto China. The link is clear. One, they believe Russian desire for power is reactive to the U.S. per 1AC Ev and tags, yet 1AC Gower and Weber admit, quote, Russia has engaged in, quote, non-elections in the seized regions, sabotage of the North Sea pipeline, increased use of indiscriminate drone attacks, the appointment of a proven hard man in charge, and a mass mobilization, unquote. They commit most clearly in Perkovich and Vadi, however, when they say, quote, Russian leaders view use as defensive, unquote, which is disproved by the Ukraine example in Crossex. 2, 1AC Gupta says, quote, the decision-making calculus of the U.S. and its allies fundamentally differs from that of adversaries, unquote. Our argument is that Russia and U.S. are not conflicting goals, but shift toward shadow warfare against those dissimilar to elites. They are in line with the future of the white
white world, the coalescence of Western far-right hopes in a union with forces in the East, securing a white racial union that exports far-right ideologies to preserve a mythical national genotype, the same way manifesting in xenophobia and providing the cultural justification for the invasion of Crimea and Ukraine, the same way that Trump does the same in the U.S. That's Arnold Romanova. It turns the case because they script a Western ontology onto Russia, painting them as domestic and platonic objects for NATO powers to force reaction from, instead of pursuing their own ambitions, which turns miscalculation arguments as well, because it is the justification for that. Their Wendy Perkovich and body evidence conclude, quote, Russian leaders mirror U.S. strategists, unquote, yet they make the arguments about how they're completely different above. Those aren't they mirrors of U.S. strategists? Relatedly, their scenario relies on misinterpreting American signals, particularly conventional attack. Setting aside whether the U.S. is likely to do an attack, why would Russia not know what the U.S. is thinking? The 1EC seems to imply that all Russia does is watch for American signals and interpret now. The alternative, decenter the mythos of whiteness and recenter the global south. The counter geopolitical narratives like Himura and Quadr, historically overdetermined the underside of humanity, so revision requires rethinking fundamental IR concepts like institutions and sovereignty. That's Subratnam, not Kondo, which was cross-ex, were not fiat at all. Utopian fiat links more to them, especially given scenario planning arguments, because they push past political barriers and isn't realistic, which distorts literature, while we're considering what's more approximate to us. Dull. Neocolonial domination is the F. We agree that international hierarchies continue after formal colonization or decolonization. The argument is that is how the F happens. Murray, we don't view weak states as incidental. We explicitly forward them, and we view the West as a psychological category, not a geographic one, which acknowledges difference, but also recognizes a common form of oppression. Let me get water. Yeah.
Alright, good.
Yep.
The way the alternative centers whiteness, how does that resolve the accidents link?
No, it doesn't center whiteness.
Or like-
it decenters whiteness.
Yeah, sorry. But go ahead. Why does it resolve the accident link?
Well, it doesn't participate in the same epistemological schema, so it doesn't acknowledge the moral truth of accidents that the app is for.
Okay, so
It recognizes that it's an
Right.
intentional outcome.
there was this like 2NC like link to an argument to like the Euler evidence that was like all accidents are created by humans, therefore we should like imbue the people who are creating the nuclear war scenarios with like the responsibility for those things. In what way does the alternative do that?
Well, it recognizes that those, exactly what you said, like the thing that you just said.
So it says that the US and Russia are responsible for using their nukes. What does that mean?
Right, so this Euler card is explicit. It's basically an answer to the Virilio accidents case and says that human subjects are in control of tech.
Right, I understand
Technology
all of
does
that.
not limit the subject to a foregone
Yeah,
conclusion.
I
right?
get that, but
yeah.
how does the alternative reorient the relationship we have to Russia and the US in terms of how they use
That's
nuclear
really
weapons?
not the question the alternative is answering. The
Okay.
alternative is
If-
answering questions
If it doesn't
about how
answer the way we
theorize IR.
orient towards the way Russia and the US uses nukes, how does it resolve the link?
It resolves the link because our link argument is about the colonial silencing that results from viewing nuclear use as accidental. So essentially the impact that it has on subjects, right? So in the context of if we accept an IR theory, if we accept this moral truth that an accident can occur, in educational spheres especially, it papers over the idea that these were developed intentionally.
Okay, so
It's
the-
like an education
Like,
thing.
the
Yeah.
easiest way to think about
Like
it.
think of it in school, you're
Just
taught
like a
certain
certification.
things, right? So we're
I
saying
think we're on
this
the
is
same
a
page as
bad
well.
form of education.
So the divide you've made between like intentional use and accidental use is that there are sort of structural processes that have made these nuclear uses inevitable.
It's just that nuclear weapons were developed with the intention to cause violence and to cause war. Okay, they were intentionally designed for those reasons.
Right.
Framing it as an
Yes.
accident absolves those very moral responsibilities
nuclear
and the
development.
intentions that
Gotcha.
led to that development.
The top of one of the link arguments was like we are not a total refusal of sovereignty. The top of the alternative was like we are a rethinking of the way we engage in institutions and sovereignty.
Right.
In what ways does the alternative not preclude?
So we can recognize, for instance, that sovereign nations or some forms of counter sovereignty can be beneficial in the global south,
Like
for
which-
instance. But generally, what our arguments are critiquing are the nationalist sovereignties,
How
the
does
idea of not
how does the
national
alternative
sovereignty
divide
that the
between those
U.S.
two
for
things?
instance uses.
Also,
Huh?
How does the alternative divide between insurgent form uses of sovereignty and
Well, it's a contextual application, right? So
Yeah,
in
but
this
we-
context, for instance, our link arguments demonstrate that the national sovereignty sphere,
And what
or
is the
the ideas of
also-
national sovereignty used by the
also
U.S.
one
are
of the
worse.
The alt card does not start with sovereignty, but says sovereignty under radical inequalities of power globally is met. What in our respect?
Wait, what's that?
Just in case. Okay, starting in 10 seconds.
So what is the importance of failures of classical physics into IR that suggests that we can map nation states as deterministic fragments of globe into atomic units includes the realization that we're really constituent products of our entangled relations. The impact planetary survival dropped. Externalizing foreign affairs as independently observable reinforces false understanding between the self and the world that reinforces dogma, state centrism, and national economic imperatives, deepening environmental and social chaos from the hubris of individuality. They do not get 1 AR responses because it's flagged and explicit in the 1 and C assumptions of rationality and behavior correspondence enable ideological hijacking, zero mismanagement policy that guarantees societal collapse through economic shocks, perpetual faith in international systems as a neutral, unthinking object, ruins design solutions, making every crisis more likely to escalate and renders policy self-defeating, which independently turns the case. Now, 2AC1, the case cannot come first. Social scientists reportedly neutral focus on linear causalities is a depoliticizing move that historically isolates individualized scenarios from social forces that include explanations that affect structural conditions. That means debate should ask critical questions about what institutions allow violence to arise, not which specific scenarios are triggered. That creates a normative ethical commitment to changing structures rather than depoliticized moves towards influencing single events. Hin and Yan 18. Survival of humanity from nuclear wars, framing shapes of policy, bio research deployed to identify discrete challenges, bringing adversity on direct causal manner, issue tracing a causal pathway for catastrophic event to a global catastrophic loss of life, an event focused on only discrete events, causally connected within short time frame, qualify existential, and a narrow framing, a one-hit KO, overshadowing other parts that converge to the same outcome and indirectly over long time scales. Higher probability mapping scenarios requires exploring critical systems beyond narrowly individual scenarios and garrison single disciplines, existential risk, informing epistemological priorities to two forward on risk, closest solutions of all sense of security, pose moral hazard, only part of the problem. Evaluating ideological underpinnings matters. This should raise the threshold for a correct prediction and cannot just say, oh look, we dropped the case Bennett in 5. We would be better off if participants in policy debates started from the beliefs and testable for and on the reputational basis for suffering or primitive attention to deterministic overconfidence hedgehogs. These kind of public intellectuals are dealing in solidarity, not credence goods. Their analysis make ideological better than feel good. Liberals, whether constructions are going badly when their arguments are more nuanced and they change the channel. Bush loyalists say their predictions Iraq were correct. Pro-invasion liberals insist they are headed in the right direction. We can improve expert judgment by applying science to the American faith and expertise. Now 2AC2, no link argument to loser, where a critique of the security dilemma theory and the 1AC certainly relies on it. Their studies import the Bayesian rational actor theory and then maps that onto states that everyone is operating under uncertainty and therefore will attempt to maximize as a well-defined set of interests. It's inherent in their 1AC piece of evidence that says only states have nuclear weapons, and it would be a reaction to the state that traces those linear projections as the well-defined state of set interests in both Russia and the United States was not the link, but the link turned. They have somehow, and there's somehow an external division of interest policed by geography that states externally respond, ignores that states are merely a discursive intermediate creation of heterogeneous actors, and you should not understand the security dilemma as such that mistakes coincidence for causality, degenerate, and folding. 15. The war emerged from the Newtonian logic, which one trains and sets in motion would stay in motion. Security literature look back in the first world, its empirical case scientifically described security dilemma, spirals, offense, defense, those causality, return to the demise in physics. Earlier theories borrowed from classical physics, which states black boxes, rational actors that continue to dominate. When the nation states push to get quantum computing, there's an added responsibility to address the actuality of quantum power. That outweighs and invalidates solvency, controls root cause, pan. And 20 popular try to limit and fold into policies to attempt to isolate the U.S. from the outside world. The U.S. insulated from themselves, the U.S. there will be nowhere in the whole. The U.S. can retreat. Trump's America will shape the whole world into populist depression. The treaty of tit for tat scenario, classical IR scenarios to be classified realism, limiting and quantum holography IR are connected, only consciousness remains limited. There's no reason to believe A holographic community could be consciously formed. The Chinese rulers organized internal relations underpinning the racial consciousness of ethical communication, all in the same body. Reimagining relations carries profound implications for diplomacy and peace. They cannot say this is only about Trump because it is in the context of their understanding of international relations as adopted by Biden. Now, 2EC3, IR theory, wrong. Winning the link zeros and is prior. Flawed IR theory cannot be useful for harm reduction because it misidentifies the problem itself. The link was to the 1AC's inclusion of the security dilemma, so even if it's reflexive, the 1AC was certainly not that. The turn also does not wholesale reject IR per the latter part of this evidence. So for example, our 1NC evidence says that the alternative is quantum holography that is able to understand international relations, that solves and challenges the drawbacks in Newtonian theorization. Pan and 20, challenging entitlements and structuralism. They just establish reality, not independent relations, despite the IR's relational drawbacks of conceptual relations beyond tautological definitions and much. Inside types implicit chicken and doubt could dilemma between entities engaged with the quantum turn quantum mechanics espouses relational holism, the quantum theory available source the gap between those calls for quantum perspective by offering a holographic approach to that holography part of the whole that contains a whole principle brought to the atomic level and the parallel level, suggesting the projection which appears to event horizon and code information. What is inside holography is duality relations to things that do propositions. Such relations do not exist before or after. Holography provides a sophisticated understanding of the whole part of international relations and enables us to incorporate Newtonian ontology as the limiting factor. Now, 2AC4, even if scenario planning is multivariable and the 1AC's internal links for that, it relies on positivism as per the 2AC because the scenario deductively applies posteriori facts derived by reason and logic from Russian documents. Drops our theory invalidates that quantum physics zeros positivism to predict state behavior, zeros every 1AC internal link. One, observer effect. There's no way to disentangle ourselves from systems reviewing, purporting objective observations, ignores that our observations themselves or behavior states, nations create their own existence under the pretense of being watched, terrorists live stream their killings, and nations publicize their military developments. Two, superstition. It's possible to distill national strategy into a utilitarian state. Classical choice theory is wrong because it assumes states have a portfolio of preference that ignores the heterogeneous and indeterminate nature of that. Third, and lastly, is the chicken and egg dilemma. Framing the states as ontological units of analysis fails to explain what created them in the first place. A 500-person animal market in Wuhan unleashed the deadliest global pandemic. A two-stadium street vendor sparked the Arab Spring. Employing geographic nations as a unit of analysis overlooks the invisible tapestry of global affairs beyond traditional statecrafts. You should not mark them in discrete terms like Russia and the United States. Lastly, 2AC5, IR studies are predictably bankrupt. Saying that we use past data does not disprove that after tracing forecasts of IR scholars over the past 3 decades, they are worse than flipping a coin. 2AC says, quote, we cite holistically methodology of domestic international studies. Hello, that's what we indicted. This is what we Tetlock did a meta-analysis and found an inverse relationship between IR knowledge and predictive accuracy. Their authors may not have known what states did in the past, but they do not know what they have done in the future, and they are your authors. Tetlock and Fine. Our definition was the professional offering of the political trends of the well-being of particular states, regional countries, international system, 284, experience, doctor, 52%, also postgraduate, 96%, 61% interviewed a major media outlet. That last card is marked at by a major media outlet.
Dropped every terminal impact US first use against Russia, China, North Korea, dividing coming out, and only that for strange that there is no planetary survival impact. 1, it's contingent on them winning a Lake 2. The perm shield it's not cultural nor unique faith in international systems. This is status quo. 3, it's internal contradiction. Causal claims, calls, collapses of false syllogism. The F is not a one-hit KO theory, but identifies a variety of ways that an inherent risk of uncertainty and US ambiguity now makes inevitable red flags or misinterpretations go nuclear. Their thesis is consistent with the F. We cannot predict nuclearism perfectly, so US first use should be off the table. We do not employ the Bayesian rational actor theory saying only states have nuclear weapons is a truth claim, even if there are a creation of heterogeneous actors. Those actors are capable of launching weapons first, which should be restrained. The pan evidence is AF US power declining now is a reason that nuclear use should be off the table, which is dropped to easy framing issue. Winning we cannot make perfect predictions is an AF argument because it proves that some miscalculations here is inevitable and contrives the accident links, and the US should not use nuclear weapons during it. The observer effect does not mean that we cannot make predictions. It applies equally to everything. The next two arguments do not apply to the AF. We've not to the nation states are the only unit or method of analysis but that assembled allies like the US and Russia are capable of using nuclear weapons first, and their impetus to do so should be restrained. Lastly, Newtonian theory is good. Abdicating concedes politics of the right, which is a drop disad by the 2AT. Right-wing politicians will use the security dilemma effect to justify use and invasion a la Iraq's, which tried to advocate for restraint, i.e. you should not divorce the plans. Epistemology from its material prescriptions, quantum holography might be able to understand international relations, but its lack of impetus for action is what our job to impact turn critiques. Now the K framework weigh the justifications for the plan versus the alter the status quo. They must prove a causal trade-off from an offense. The impact is clash. Scenario planning is key to deconstruct biases like the intersubjective commitments to deterrence. The external impact is nuclear learning. There's a paradigmatic imperative to uncover assumptions about nuclear deterrence and arms control. The body C fosters empathy about nuclear decision making. Their model creates apathy and demobilizes responses to technocratic rhetoric, secrecy, and limited accountability surrounding nuclear politics, which makes everyone's impacts inevitable. That's our Pelopidis evidence. It may be true that the ballot does not have the levers of power, but it still creates valuable subjectivity through a model of debate that raises public awareness about nuclear weapons. The logical implication of that framework argument is every discussion about nuclear weapons is shut down, which we have impact turn clash turns on offense A scope. One ballot cannot change subjectivity broadly. Family and career outweigh only the process of in-depth iterative engagement fosters flexibility and challenges flawed assumptions, which proves we're more approximate. B support praxis. Our analysis is incomplete. Testing contingent solutions is better, which is our sus evidence that turns law because tracing conflict dynamics are enables studying how structural violence is produced domestically, which is our curricular evidence. C support pure negation. Epistemological critique that does not tie itself to specific practices. Conservative grifting in disguise. That's our Vickers evidence. The negative agenda of opposing decolonial thought is entirely insular and cedes the terrain of action to conservatives. The framing issue is U.S. nuclear policy is inevitable, so try to for an ethical orientation towards it. All of this is a benefit to the program because the alt alone precludes analysis of Ukraine. The Mathur evidence, the Trier obviously gets new answers. You can't just read the tag and then the card, but we have impact turned to the West being a psychological category is why it must be refused as the impetus for nuclear politics. U.S. preemption is bad because it universalizes nuclear colonialism and threat discourse. Second, the predictions good arguments on case answer for not extending a fairness impact, but we do not justify picks. This argument was a coherent our interpretation weighs the full justifications of the affirmative. Holding us accountable is not reason to vote negative. You should weigh the sum of what we've said versus what they've said, especially given that we have critiques of their framing, which proves cost-benefit analysis is inevitable to make a coherent decision, and there's no participation impact. App choice does not mean we are prepared to have the affirmative muted. Quite the contrary. The reason fiat is key to skills is the predictability internally, which I extended above. Epistemology is not consequential, which is our Vickers evidence, which is poorly handled by the block. The implication of this argument is that if we win the case is consequentially valuable, that should come prior because some war crimes do come from the best intentions of the 2 and C is ahistorical nonsense. We have not said utilitarianism is good, just that existential catastrophe is bad. The distinction is significant because it's not wedded to the examples of the 2 and C. Nuclear war comes down on city centers rapidly and forecloses all future value and relationality. The accidents link 1, that is not accidentalization theory. The lack of 2 and C quote should be descriptive of how poor this link argument is. That when AC does not say accidents once, neither did A. Cross-link second perm solves it. 2 and C cross-links establishes the alternative resolves the link by saying the US and Russia are culpable for nuclear weapons use, which is what the affirmative thesis is. Third, that Slayer evidence is not a contradiction. It says accidents occur because of contingent forces, which is our argument. The impact is backwards. The Hiroshima examples are AF arguments because the US should not use nuclear weapons off of imperfect knowledge. The size ability link 1, the alternative does not solve it, which will be below. Second, the nation state frame is good. It secures economic, ecological, and interpersonal gains. This is dropped impact turn to their framing permutation. Do both solves it. The Ritchie evidence is that it's a deconstruction of the intermittent deterrence belief because no first use takes nuclear weapons off the table for domineering and coercing other nations, which is good. And dropped by the block, the impact to this is wrong. The F does not redeem insidious weapons, and there's no explanation of this argument. The Gupta evidence says that Russia has mistrust because of our first use posture. Is not a contradiction to say they are unwilling to use nuclear weapons and wanting to invade Ukraine. The Russia link is inane. We do not believe Russia is reactive to the US broadly, just in the domain of nuclear weapons, which has been clear since 1 AC cross-links. We do not promote a harmonious vision of US and Russia as can trace that model each other broadly, but a distinct dyad that has nuclear tension. Second, given given that the link lacks all uniqueness of permutation shields it because of the alternative is able to come US, NATO, Russia, whiteness now it can overcome the affirmative third. The 2NC quotes were totally divorced of context. They are all about Russia's nuclear behavior, not how they act broadly. Now, lastly, uncentering whiteness. We are not utopian fiat. Our interpretation was that fiating international actors is bad, which is the plan. The alt one case is an impact turn. That was on framework. Second, it fails. The Murray evidence and the Mickelson evidence are dropped. Their impact turns to mutual exclusivity. Sole focus on decentering whiteness because of structural problems with the plan. Reifies emphasis on logical absolutism that empowers gender and racial absolutism and shuts down international decolonial base building, combining our orientations for what creates the possibility for miscalculation, nuclear politics, counterinsurgency, fetishization is key to pay attention to the internal diversities in IR research, which is our job from our evidence. It is the critique of the alternative because they have said that whiteness should be centered in all international relations discourse. There's no impact to the US-Russia link because we have not promoted the impact needs to be contingent to nuclear policy because that is the only thing that the plan affects, and the 2NC does not make a causal argument for it affecting the international structure of US and Russia relations broadly.
be just the K.
Is it just the K?
Yeah. Just give me 1 second.
The Twin C was explicit that Link Lose was good 1 year last when they didn't provide procedural justifications for framework only education or skills ones that they concede. The main can't change the levels of power, which is what all their skills offense is based off of, making case outweighs perm and impossible to an R because we merely have to win any risk of a Link half must justify the benefits present to the 1AC prior to plan evaluation, if and only if they posit rhetoric is impactful that condition nukes their offense. The 1AR had no answer to this. 1AC introduced offense to scholarship, and we only get to invalidate the case if they introduce that offense to the 1AC, which is most reciprocal. Strategic benefits must come with strategic costs. If they don't want to invalidate the case, they simply shouldn't have introduced benefits to scholarship in the 1AC, so AF choice zeros their offense, counter-interpretation in 1AC is not object study value consequence of 1AC, a scholarship part of plan AF gets away the benefits of presenting the scholarship, the reason that should disprove the scholarship, produced without attracts with switch to advantage and insolvency. The 2NC clearly define justifications as the reasons to vote AF, i.e. the IR descriptions, the basis for the AF's impact insolvency claims. That means we don't get, quote, infinite prior questions, global framing issue. They've conceded you should overcorrect for your implicit bias and impossible for you to separate your own investments to the world order from their argumentation, so you should presume their arguments false. This independently justifies unfairness no matter the magnitude of the violation and drop its essential for colonized subjects who should not be forced to litigate grievances at the level of scholarship at the level of proceduralism or consequence, which is our Hobson evidence specific to IR theorizing in debate. The 1AR screwed up the offense for our affirming interpretation, illusory whiteness. DA directly indicts. We get the plan, they get the K. No new 2AR answers because the card is explicit. Weighing the plan narrows the scope of theorizing the one of contingencies in the larger system rather than theorizing at the level of the system itself. The best frame to understand this is their interpretation results in critique inside the paradigm using individualized scenarios without ever challenging the very ethics of paradigms or assumptions themselves, trading off with structural analysis of IR theories. This subverts the consequentialism debate because it's question begging of which consequences to prioritize. We're saying we should prioritize as consequences of research, which is far more proximate and holds them responsible for what they say in this space, which turns conservatism arguments below. Dropped fiat isn't key to skills and pushes past political barriers and can't teach you how to develop true nuclear expertise. Debating about the consequences of introducing your research, however, does. Nuclear learning incentivized more by our framework interpretation because we consider how we come to know what we know about nuclear policy demonstrated by our 2NC cross-checks about the accidents link about education about nuclear weapons. No uniqueness for their pragmatism claims. They've dropped the debate, is over-obsessed with problem solving instead of posing important questions. Apathy comes from that plethora of plans without creating a grammar to understand why we're acting in the first place or what problems to solve. Methods as simulation and testing without historical analysis and implications. So theories is more dogmatic and profound self-reflexivity because IR scholars never test and debate about the fundamental assumptions behind IR theory themselves. Distance politics makes us more apathetic instead of focusing on what we can control, i.e. scholarship, which turns Polypidus and Kirky. The Vickers evidence is wrong. Conservatism isn't justified on our framework because war crimes also have bad justifications behind them. Most war crimes were committed by people who considered consequences and accepting them, so the alternative is not conservatism. We just disagreed with their definition of politics. Rejection of scholarship is political in the same way as the 1AC because it challenges the dominant narratives of nuclearism in debate and their instantiation, which is their connection between the plan and knowledge and cross-sex. 1AR dropped epistemological critiques are also themselves epistemological critiques, so it's logically prior. The plan follows its justifications. IR scholars make core epistemological assumptions, then extend those to make predictions. So if we've disputed those assumptions, there's no objective, neutral, or truth claim to work
wars from our links in which turns their pragmatism offense. Now, fairness stuff, this wasn't really there, but it's not intrinsic good. Fairness only matters to preserve the game, which is bad under their motto. No debate is preferable to a violent motto of debate that's anti-educational, and there's no impact to losing the activity because they're so invested in debate does nothing. Alt causes doesn't disprove that debate does shape subject for activity because if in-depth academic research and conversations with others, that's the only reason. Other venues also change the way we think, and they drop that even if there's not a one-to-one correspondence between round and personal opinion, you presume it does, and the ballot solves by rejecting their violent scholarship. Now, the permutation, they can't win on it without beating the link. The 216 explicitly said all links are TAs that demonstrate severance, which is FBI for ethics and argument of responsibility, and is contextualized by framework above. Vote neg to reject the 1EC's instantiation of Russian harmony. The 1EC is a transition from colonization from the competition paradigm to colonization via cooperation, a more insidious form of violence. The 1 era was all new here. The 2EC had no offense for this, and all the nuclear and only nuclear stuff was new. They only said that it better explains their scenarios in the 2EC, and that is all they get. The 1EC's description of Russia is exactly that. However, 1EC Gupta claims that the decision-making calculus of the U.S. and its allies fundamentally differs from that of Russia. The thesis of the 1EC is that Russia is defensive, reactive to the U.S.'s pressures to use. Per 1EC cross-sex, the Ukraine example is instructive, and in the context of nuclear weapons, Russia has threatened nuclear use, which is in the context of nuclear use in Ukraine. If anyone defends them in this way, Russia and U.S. are not just conflicting goals, but shift toward shadow warfare against those dissimilar to elites, which explicitly is a dispute to the claim that decision-making calculus of the U.S. and its allies fundamentally differs from Russia, because currently that is conceived in terms of distance in space and time. With the 1EC's convening of the two and conception of Russia as reactive, domestic, and platonic, imbues debaters as agents of practical policing, primed to eliminate difference. They are in line with the future of the white world, the coalescence of Western far-right hopes in a union with forces in the East, which ultimately secures a white racial union that exports far-right ideologies to preserve this mythical national stereotype, manifesting in xenophobia and providing the cultural justification for the invasion of Crimea and Ukraine, which is our Arnold and Romanova evidence. They've dropped it. This is examples from their 1EC evidence cracking down on descendants, suppressing ethnic minorities, non-election in seized regions, etc., which all demonstrates they are offensive in this way. The justification imbues debaters, which is worse, and they've dropped Tern's case, which was carded. 1AR concedes the 2EC's move to say they're a dismantling of deterrence logics, yet presenting a defense of deterrence as the exact flip-flop and contradictions. And earlier in the 1AC, they also say that Russia mirrors the U.S., which is a contradiction to the idea they have a completely different one. The threshold is so low because the 1AC Gupta evidence is explicit that, quote, even the slightest conflicting signal about intention would be enough, unquote. So it just is exactly what they, quote, use to justify preemptive action, unquote, which turns the case and is dropped. Now, the IR stuff, it's necessary for them, but our links are assumptive of their reforms to IR, so this is largely irrelevant. The alternative is also largely irrelevant. Voting Act cannot make political change, but it does sanction a series of harmonious tropes and justifications that do cause real-world violence in this space as well, and they've dropped the generate uniqueness for us for rejecting the LUM solves. Now, the Murray stuff, we explicitly answered it. We explicitly forefront and began from the perspective of the global South, recognizing the U.S. isn't what holds together political order, so it links far more to them. We acknowledge difference, but recognize a common form of oppression that should be combated using strategic essentialism and rejection of IR scholarship and debate, which is what Spratnam is saying.
argument I'm answering in the 2 NR's framework, so it should be pretty straight up. All right, we all good? Maybe not? Cool. Nuclear first use is bad. The alternative might also have valuable contributions to IR, but the false choice they posited between decentering whiteness and institutional engagement forecloses the most important forms of harm reduction and demobilizes the alternative. Texas should have kicked the alt. They will lose this debate because they've undercovered a permutation that accesses an almost unmitigated nuclear learning impact with inroads to their offense. Even if we lose the permutation, we can win that the terminal impact alone outweighs the nebulous impact that they have in the link debate. Now, the framework debate at the top, our interpretation is that they must prove the plan is bad with causal links that requires uniqueness, or the alternative to solve the links. Our clash offense will win us the round. It is in defense of our form of scenario planning and impact towards the alternative, and a net benefit to the permutation. The external nuclear learning impact is massive. There's no impact defense. Just you sort of can't solve it, which demonstrates that it is try or die for an interpretation that is able to access it. Or when you see Milan and Pelopidas evidence, should be the first card to evaluate. There's a paradigmatic imperative to imagine futures where we delegitimize the U.S. nuclear arsenal. The Twin Arms appeals to mutual exclusivity, and you link, you lose, refuses the call to analyze war plans, creating apathy and crushing empathy, which turns all of their analysis about creating insurgent technologies for colonized subjects, because it is all impossible in a phase where nuclear war plans are created opaquely, which reduces the ability for insurgent movements to be able to sabotage the U.S. empire in the first place. That outweighs the recent executive first use is on the tables because the public is unwilling to think about nuclear war that sanctions inhumane uses of nuclear arsenal and allows war planners to forswear consequentialism, which is a decided impact turn to the alternative as well as the framework of you link, you lose. They have conceded that it turns their offense, analyzing militarization, enable studying domestic forms of structural balance, or Kirky evidence says the international shapes how state and boundary institutions are created and what tactics they draw from, which demonstrates that their interpretation alone is not that their interpretation is not the only one that's able to solve for education for colonized subjects, because we access the same forms of offense described in the Hobson evidence, because there's an intimate connection between the international and the domestic, i.e. the public always filters back into the private and the private always filters back into the public, which demonstrates that scenario analysis and forecasting and comparing the benefits against the consequences of the plan is necessary to create the best forms of insurgent technology, and that is not the alternative, and the framework alone demobilizes those movements. They say you link, you lose was good, that is impact turned via the clash offense, because forecasting and scenario planning are all necessary, saying that we should just one link should outweigh the plan demonstrates that they forego it because we are not able to evaluate whether or not the plan is more good than bad. They say debate cannot shake the levels of power. We have sort of impact turned this framing, which is something that the 2NR does not address with the nuance that they should have. Our Milan and Pelopidas evidence is fantastic. It says that the reason that the nuclear elites are able to use the arsenal in a violent and coercive way is because there's opacity surrounding the way that war plans are constructed in the first place. Our sus evidence says that scenario planning over the international is necessary to deconstruct the intersubjective deterrence belief. Our Ritchie evidence says that NFU is an essential first step to create ethics of common humanity, that deconstructs the idea that an aggressive Russia must be deterred via nuclear first use. The entire analysis of the 1AC that Russia is a defensive nuclear power is necessary to access this, because it demonstrates that the U.S. does not need first use on the table to prevent Russia from taking over the near abroad. Absent that, Biden backs Putin into a corner, which is an aggressive use of the nuclear arsenal and an extension of the carceral state that is bad, must be rejected. And the alternative is no ways of accessing, which demonstrates that it is a sort of turns case, or it sort of turns the link argument to the arguments about colonialism and carceral state building. They say rhetoric matters. We can say that or scholarship is good, but also say that scholarship should not be the first thing evaluated, both of which are consistent. And or clash offense impact turns it. They say we can't impact solvency. We have impact turn this via the opacity arguments made on the Milan and Pelopidas evidence, as well as the scenario analysis stuff that we saw via the sus evidence. They say she should overcorrect for your implicit biases. That is only possible when you contextualize the alternative material solvency to the affirmative. They say it's key to colonized subjects. That was above. We did not preclude it. And the scope in which the Mather evidence was also answered by the Vickers evidence, which says that you should not just purely evaluate the debate based on our epistemic assumptions. The pure negation is insular and forecloses international, multifaceted insurgent building. They have conceded that this turns the alternative, because our dull evidence as well as the Murray evidence says that is all. That's a sort of solidarity within education is necessary to build a better
counter insurgent movement to sort of deconstruct colonial base building, which in turn link turns all the entire thesis of the Vassar evidence. The analogy they have with their answer to the Vickers evidence is a logical fallacy. Powell and Kissinger would suck at debate because they would not have accurate scenarios and forecasting for how we should intervene and engage in legal institutions. They say they challenge dominant narratives. So do we. Their epistemology case is epistemology case. Argument is tautological. Epistemology must be applied to the affirmative. Epistemology must be applied to the affirmative. Now, permutation do both. You can see the Ritchie evidence, which is a decided impact turn to the harmonization link. In order to win this debate, they must win that mutual vulnerability with Russia is bad. That is impossible, considering they conceded that extinction outweighs and mutual vulnerability with Russia is the only way to prevent it via nuclear war. For closes the possibility for all life, the fact that they have appealed to the alternative because it creates the possibility for liberation and an alternative world demonstrates that you should not take the gambit and decide whether or not black and colonial activists should be able to live another day, which demonstrates that institutional engagement is necessary. The risk that we outweigh, the risk that we are right outweighs the risk that we are wrong, and you should engage in the permutation even if you think that there is a small risk of the link. Or Ritchie evidence says it creates that nothing's common humanity because everybody has an inherent interest in mutual vulnerability. Everybody has an inherent interest in mutual vulnerability. Or Pergamishn or Badi evidence from the 1AC from the 1AC says that Russia mirrors U.S. nuclear aggression and modernization, which demonstrates that only the plan is able to solve by demobilizing it. The last argument I have to answer is the Russia link. But the framing issue for all of this is that the alternative was not very well explained in the 2NR, which demonstrates that the threshold for the severance arguments in the 2NR should be incredibly high because we have demonstrated that NFU is compatible with an orientation towards a world that decenters whiteness. The Russia link is wrong. The 1 error is not new because the 2AC said Russian nuclear labor was distinct from its broader posture. And this has been very clear in every cross-sectional list. The 2NC applied the Arnold evidence in new ways, so everything we did is justified. The link argument does not apply. The argument assumes we have made overarching descriptive plans of Russian state behavior or said that there should be an international convergence between two major powers. The argument is not that any dialogue, diplomacy, or discussion takes place as a result of the plan, which obviates all their impacts about crackdowns and the implication of Ukrainian invasion turning the case. We have only said that U.S. pressures Russia into reciprocity because they believe they get out of it has to have its hero capability in response to the U.S. They conceded that neither the plan nor justification trained debaters to think about Russia and the U.S. as a harmonious system because it only says that Russian nuclear policy is reactive to the U.S. and nuclear first use is a necessary harm reduction strategy to prevent Russia and the U.S. from destroying the world. Here we go.